I'm Algenon Cash, and you're locked in. So many challenges going on throughout the world right now. We are still dealing with COVID-19. I mean, so many people would have told me we were still dealing with COVID 2 or 3 years later. I would have had no idea. But I also think that the pandemic that we've went through the last 2 years has also revealed some other issues within our society and our community, issues around mental health. And I think the pandemic certainly demonstrated the cracks that we have within our community when it comes to mental health. My audience knows that I was someone that was really just torn up about the news related to Chesley Christ, who was a national beauty pageant winner, a Miss North Carolina, and also seemingly just very successful. Had a spot on TV Guide and was a journalist with them, and already had a law degree and was going down that road, and ended up taking her own life just because of a lot of the stress and pressure that she was dealing with day to day. And so I reached out to a good friend of mine. You've seen him on the show once before. You've heard me talk about him in the past. Brian Sims is a former psychology professor at North Carolina A&T. Also used to come on with me quite a bit back in the day when we were doing Community Focus with Renee Vaughn on 97.1. Certainly miss those days. But currently, he is also the founder of JOMO Works, which is a project management and research support organization working with the education industry. Brian, thank you for locking in, man. How are you?
Glad to be locked in. Algenon Cash, Triads, Truth, and Triumph. Glad to be here, brother. Shout out to Renee Vaughn. You took me back.
Yeah, man. I was listening to a show Renee did a couple days ago, and found myself just reminiscing about those early weekend mornings. I'm glad I get to do my show now whenever I want to do it at whatever time I want to do it. I don't have to get up at 5:30 in the morning, but I miss that. And also miss the days with Buster, man, when you used to come in the station and
shout out to Buster Brown. Yep.
But we had you on the show last year, and we talked about a number of things related to Black culture. I raised a point about we had just learned about DMX at that time. Obviously, he didn't die from suicide or anything, but certainly died from substance abuse, and many believe that excessive substance abuse was tied to a lot of mental illness. You heard me talk a little bit about Chesley Christ. We also in the last several weeks have just seen a barrage of Instagram posts from Kanye West and his ongoing debacle with his now not divorced wife, but soon to be divorced wife, Kim Kardashian. It just seems like, Brian, no matter how good you might be doing in life, none of us are really immune from some type of mental illness.
Yeah, and I think that perspective is one that's like just necessary, right? It forces us to really, I think, question how we define wellness and mental health in a society in which we do things pathologically, sort of by routine. The norm in many ways is sort of unhealthy. I mean, if you think about just basic structural aspects of a lot of folks' day, like as a parent, I know as you as a parent, like I know one of the things that I really struggled with was like daycare. I remember, being like, how does it make, like, here I am about to give, the most valuable person in the world to me over to strangers, let's be honest, because I'm willing to pay them and they're going to watch my son because I'm paying. I know full well, I mean, they put in the contract, we're only going to watch your son for as long as you pay us, so that I can go earn, money at a job. It's like, does that really make sense? Like, we're separating ourselves from ourselves and our families to get money. So I think you can make a strong argument that really doesn't make a lot of sense. And the mental health question that you raised is, what is it, what we're seeing is many folks, perhaps all of us, seem on various levels to not be doing okay. I tend, and this from our, millions of conversations, I tend to look for structural explanations. I don't think the mental health crisis that we're seeing literally unfold before our eyes has much to do with individual personalities. I don't think we're going to be able to understand or do anything about it from an individual difference perspective. I think we got to look at What is it about our what is it about the societal frame that pushes us towards decisions and forces us into lanes that then manifests itself in unhealthy behaviors, and in this case, like you mentioned with the sister, taking her own life.
So yeah, I think I'm catching what you're saying. So your argument is just that just the pressure of society. I mean, whether it's the competitive pressure to keep up with the Joneses, whether it's the mainstream cultural pressure that we see to always drive the latest and greatest new car, or even what we see in rap culture, the pressure to go out and buy all the fancy jewelry, just the stress and the anxiety and the pressure from that, you believe is just really having a big negative impact on people's mental psyche.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think so if you're a fan, for those of us fans of the late great Dr. Amos Wilson, legendary figure in the field of African psychology, he was real big on that perspective, that mental health of the people is an extension of the systems that they subscribe to. So, whether we talk, I mean, we just wrapped, a wonderful Super Bowl, celebration for millions of folks around the world. I don't know if you saw the halftime show, big subject on social, and then what I saw was a lot of celebration around like the nostalgia from Dre and Snoop and Eminem and folks, from a generation ago. But what I saw, Algenon, was the first 2 or 3 performances were about pimps and bitches and hoes. And then you bring out Mary J. Blige, and no shade to any of these artists, but you bring out Mary J. Blige, or with what looked like a floor-length blonde wig, crooning her heart out about her pain and sorrow. And I was just thinking, like, okay, so what is the message here? What is like the symbol message that folks are getting, right? So you got brothers who are dancing and singing about their ability to control, oppress, abuse Black womanhood, and then you get a Black woman who is intentionally approximating white beauty standards, who's then crying in sad and sorrow. I was like, and that's our Super Bowl halftime. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, what Amos Wilson would say is like, we can't look to how like mood or personality or individual sort of like factors to explain. We should look to structural, like in this case, a media message that sends a very clear, in my view, a very clear notion of like, yo, this place is not really designed for balance. It's not designed for health. It's not designed for relationships that would lend itself towards people feeling good about themselves, right? That celebration is really like a very problematic one from a family sort of standpoint. So just one quick example that came to mind, but I think it's all over society. Like there's no real, wherever you look, health is rare if you find
it. I like this. I like the vein that you're going down. I'm already regretting because I don't have as much time for this conversation. Almost feel like I might have opened a can of worms here. We're gonna have to make sure we do like a larger roundtable conversation, man, because I'd agree with you actually. I think that society places so much pressure on you to keep doing better, to keep performing, to be like the person that's standing next to you, that it can literally drive you crazy because you never get to a point where you're just comfortable and content and happy with who you are. How problematic is this? You think about Chesley Chris, who I mentioned.
Yep.
I mentioned Kanye West. I mentioned DMX. Anthony Johnson. We just lost him from alcoholism. That was the guy that played in Friday. Very successful comedian, great stand-up guy. Went off to do a lot of other movies. I mentioned the young guy I just read about, Juice WRLD, who's a great talented artist, but ended up dying in 2019 from substance abuse issues. These are famous people. Like these are people that make way more money than me, have access to way more resources than me. And these are people that are abusing drugs, or they've even taken their own life. what does that say about just the average ordinary person that is trying to put food on the table tonight?
That's a great question. Yeah, so you made me think about my son. Shout out to Brock Kiyume, who was a Juice World fan. He's the one who told me about that scenario. I'd never even heard of Juice World, but that's because I'm old. But yeah, your question's a good one. Like, I think first of all, we got to put it in its historical context. Those folks that you mentioned are at the end of a relatively long list of high profile, highly visible celebrities and folks who, from an economic, financial, pop culture standpoint, looked like they had it all, but but quote unquote behind the scenes were really struggling. So whether you're talking about Marley, you name it, there have been so many super famous icons and celebrities that you wouldn't think like would have those kinds of problems, who have had those issues. Again, I tend to say, what is it about the spotlight? What is it about the pinnacle of what I think most of us are actually aspiring to? So when I see a beauty pageant who struggles with issues to the point where suicide becomes a factor, I wonder about the millions and millions of teenage girls out here who would love to be in that position. I wonder about the millions and millions of boys who are looking at approximated images of beauty again via social media. So are they different than us in terms of like their, like, to your point about like how much money they make and the lives that they lead? Absolutely. But are they different than us in terms of what they're doing, like how they're functioning in society? I'm not so sure. So I think it's almost sort of like a false dichotomy to see famous or successful or celebrity or highly visible individuals as different than the average person. Most of us now in our minds kind of see ourselves in that vein. So if that makes some sort of sense. So, it's almost like I don't think it would be too far of a stretch to say we actually want those problems. When we hear, because again, we've heard it for generations. We've heard famous people since way before me and you, Algenon, talk about the stress and the strain and the problems and the destroyed friendships. I mean, we could go back one generation to Biggie and talk more money, more problems. We could go back 2 generations to Ray Charles, you know what I'm saying? 3 generations to Brown, over 4 generations to Aretha, right? Respect. I mean, at the root of, I think, the Black cultural ethos is like, the closer I get to this thing that I'm chasing, the worse off and the more problematic my life becomes. And I feel like that's a riddle unless you see it for what it really is, which is like, we're all really doing the same thing. We have different levels of, to your point, like access and income and resources, but we're not doing wildly different things with our mentality, with our lives, with our intentionality and our energy.
And there seems to be a common theme that I notice, like from people who suffer from this. And when I say people who suffer from this kind of mental illness or whatever you want to say, I'm not judging anyone outside of me. I mean, if you follow me, if you're in my audience, you know that I've been even very upfront about the fact that I've in the past have suffered from stress, anxiety, bouts with depression, simply because I'm out here pushing so hard, and I'm trying to make sure that I get back to every email and every question and every voicemail and every phone call and everybody who wants to come onto the show and all these things. I mean, as you talk about the pressure, the other thing that I've also noticed, and I've been guilty of this, Brian, and I think a lot of people who suffer from mental illness is guilty of this. It's also the pressure to always compare yourself to other people. It's like you see someone doing something, and instead of just being very content in the moment with who you are and what your abilities are and where you are, you get into this trap of comparing where you are and where this other person is. And I've come to learn that that is very dangerous, when you get into these comparisons, because all of a sudden you can't even really appreciate and value what it is that you actually bring to the table. And so you just feel this constant pressure to wear a shirt that doesn't quite fit you. You know what I mean? Like you're constantly trying to be someone else. I'm sure, Brian, that we even see some of this within our own friend groups and within our family circles. How do we recognize it? And when we do recognize it, what should we be doing as just a good friend, a good brother, a cousin that cares?
Another great question. So I got two answers. First, you mentioned friends and family. I think we got to keep as center in the conversation around like how did things get this way? Schools. You mentioned comparison. I immediately thought about school, right? I mean, that's really the goal. Like you get an A, I got a B. So now I know where I am in relation to you, right? You got 3.8. I got a 3.75. So it's like now we have a way of literally being able to put ourselves in relationship and comparison and competition to everybody else. I think the fact that early child development is paired with that highly competitive sort of notion of comparison is a big cause for how you get adults who are suffer from the things that you mentioned. So I just wanted to make sure we threw schools in there. And as a shameless plug, I mentioned, Joma Works, we've got a school mental health teacher training initiative designed to sort of give teachers and educators some tools to help them identify when and where there's mental health issues that are happening inside the school space. So the schools is a big part for me. And I think the other thing I'll say is, and I'm not a clinician, psychologist, but not a clinician, so take this with a grain of salt. I've always felt like the real value in counseling, in therapy, in psychiatry, from a Western sort of standpoint, has really just been the ability to find someone who's A, willing to listen to you, and B, willing to listen to you. I don't think it's really very complicated. Like most of us, especially as Black folks, most of us don't have people that have the time and intentionality who genuinely want to listen to what we've got going on. The ability to share your world and perspectives with other human beings, I would argue, is at the core of what it means to be human, right? We think about some of the most violent, disruptive punishments imaginable, and they all come down to like isolation. Parents who say, go stand over in the corner. That's like separation, right? In prisons, like solitary confinement, you'll go crazy. So the what we call, social isolation actually leads to the sorts of mental and emotional problems that folks have coping with reality. But it all comes down to an inability for somebody else to understand, to hear what you got going on. So when you talk to a therapist, when you talk to a counselor, when you talk to a psychiatrist, and I know there are people out there who are probably mental health experts and professionals who are saying he doesn't know what he's talking about. And maybe I don't. I'm just giving you my opinion. I think the core of the therapy thrust is being in genuine, sincere conversation with somebody and knowing, or at least feeling like what you're saying is being heard by another person. So my answer to you is, yeah, we don't have to have a degree in order to be helpful to others in your space in terms of mental health. Like listening goes a long way. Most of us were busy. Most of us were distracted. Most of us are stressed and dealing with the problems of life. And so somebody else's problems intruding into our consciousness is usually, we got wonderful ways of blocking that out, right? Like our devices make blocking other people out good and easy. So my answer to your question is like, what would life look like if we weren't so motivated to isolate ourselves and only include those voices and those energies that we want? What if we had to like literally swim in the pond of humanity as it actually is? You see what I'm saying? Like I made this person angry. Now I got to deal with their anger. Like, that's what would mental health look like if we really were embracing that sort of paradigm, as opposed to as soon as you made me angry, so I'm not only am I not going to tell you what you did, but you're just never going to hear from me again. Like this ghosting notion, I think, is more fascinating than it seems. And maybe that dates me, as almost 43. But I think again, long rambling answer, Algenon, but I think that's my answer. Like we can help each other simply by listening to each other.
That's a good answer, and it's a great note to end on as well. I mean, I'm definitely out of time, but you left us with a lot of wisdom on that last response. I think just showing empathy can go a long way with us improving our community, improving our families, and improving our relationships. And I do agree with Brian, because I am very guilty of it. Sometimes I will see out the corner of my eye somebody coming over to try to talk to me, and I will purposely bury my head in this phone because I just don't want to be bothered at times. And I hate to admit that, but it's true. And I think we all feel that we're all sometimes overwhelmed with our day-to-day life, and it makes it hard for us to be an active listener, a good friend, and just show empathy. And so I have got to work on that. I've got to get better. Brian has given us the prescription. You've got to get better. We're all going to get better together. And I encourage you to just be an active listener. And that means listening to really understand what the other person is saying, not listening, trying to figure out what your response is going to be to that person once they finish talking. So Brian, I appreciate you doing this, man. I wrote down a note. We got to do a mental health roundtable. I'm gonna bring you in. I'm gonna get a clinician. I'm gonna get a few people together, and we're gonna have a much more deeper dive on this particular topic, because I think there's so much more we could have talked about today. To my audience, I always appreciate you locking in with me. Make sure you do stay tuned to WTOB, because that's where the Locked In Show broadcasts every Sunday morning. And of course, that's also where we share our restaurant of the week for Eat, Drink, Triad. So make sure you are listening to WTOB. If you do miss the show on WTOB, you can always access it on Apple, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, wherever you like to download your favorite podcast. You can lock in there. And then, as always, I encourage you to continue to follow Locked In, or follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And until next time, y'all stay locked in.